Welcome, Bronco Nation, to another exciting video. The one thing that I get asked the most to do on this channel is basketball content. I know that I don't live up to those requests as much as I should on this channel. It's definitely not my area of expertise, which is why I've decided I'm going to do one. I'm going to bring on someone who that is their area of expertise. And so I have brought on Ron Counts, formerly of the Idaho State, now out with Hero Sports. He has been covering Mountain West basketball, Boise State, obviously, but Mountain West basketball as a whole for a very long time. And today he has joined me to talk about the Mountain West men's basketball tournament. We're going to go into this tournament. We're going to go into the bracket. We're going to give our previews and predictions. We're going to talk about dark horses, favorites for this tournament. We're going to talk about teams that we expect to win it all, teams that had exciting seasons, teams that disappointed. This is not just for Boise State fans, it's for Mountain West fans as a whole. Obviously, there'll be a lot of Boise State content here as well, but this is for all Mountain West fans. So if you have any thoughts on the tournament itself, on the season for your team, we want to hear them, and I want to hear who you think is going to win this Mountain West basketball tournament. I have thoughts of doing some kind of potential raffle for those who pick it right. So if you think you have a good idea who you think is going to win this tournament, put it in the comments below. Do it while we're doing this live. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your takes. This isn't just us two talking. We want to bring in your perspective as well. But when the video is done, make sure you go into the recorded version and put your prediction in as well so that it actually counts and is seen by everybody else watching this video afterwards. But thanks again, Ron, so much for coming on. I can't wait to have this discussion with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's such an exciting time of year. It's March. March Madness is here. Teams are playing for their lives. These tournament formats are what college basketball is all about, and it's a really exciting time of year.
Well, it certainly is an exciting time of year. I actually have the tournament bracket here. I'm learning how to use this product a little bit more. So we actually have the tournament bracket here, so you can see the field as it currently stands right now. Obviously, New Mexico at that #1 slot, and then followed by Colorado State, Utah State, San Diego State, and Boise State. And then the initial field, which is going to be the initial game starting off on this coming Wednesday. So a couple days from now, we'll have the initial field. San Jose State, Wyoming, Nevada, Fresno State, UNLV, and Air Force all playing to get into the Thursday. And then obviously Friday and then Saturday is the final game with the team that we think is going to win this. Before we start going into this bracket, and we will be giving our previews and predictions. And again, we want to hear your own thoughts, your own previews and predictions as well. Before we actually start going into this bracket, the Mountain West has traditionally done quite well when it comes to basketball. At least the last few years, they've put a lot of teams in the tournament. What last year we had like 6 or 7, somewhere in that number. Mm-hmm. So the Mountain West has traditionally been quite a powerhouse in basketball. This seems to have been a little bit of a step down from their normal performance. How many teams do you think the Mountain West can realistically put into March Madness this year?
I think 4 is a realistic number. I think New Mexico, Utah State, San Diego State, they're all in pretty safely, in my opinion. Colorado State, if they can win a game or two here in the tournament, they're definitely in, And then you got the outlier, really, which is Boise State, They got a big hill to climb, and they're going to have to get 2, maybe even 3 wins in this tournament, in my opinion, to really punch their ticket for sure. So I think 4 is a safe number, 5 possibly. I don't think we see 6 again like we did last year.
Yeah, a lot of outside analysts certainly down on this Mountain West conference. ESPN's Joe Lunardi saying he thinks only 3 potentially, listing some of those teams you mentioned there, San Diego State, Utah State, New Mexico, but he does have Boise State and Colorado State on the bubble. For Boise State specifically, you mentioned they probably need to win a couple of good games in this tournament to maybe make it to Dayton or something like that. Is that what Boise State is looking like? If they can get a couple of wins, do they need to win this whole tournament to be in March Madness, or does a couple of good showings will put them in the bubble, you think?
I think winning the tournament is the only way to guarantee they're in March Madness. That's for sure. I mean, you look at the resume, and there's definitely some high points. They got to win over Clemson. They got to win over St. Mary's, which is really impressive. And then in recent weeks, they've beaten New Mexico and Utah State. So they have the pieces in place. They can play with the best teams, but they just haven't done it consistently enough all year. So in my opinion, they got to win a bare minimum of 2 games in this tournament. If they don't win 2 games, maybe even 3, they're going to be tough. I mean, and even with 3 wins, if they don't win all, they're looking at playing and being one of the first 4 in, playing one of those play-in games in Dayton again, as you mentioned. So they got a tough hill to climb. This would be a really different story if they had beaten Colorado State in the regular season finale. They would have had the 2 seed in the tournament. They'd have had an easier road to the title game. But now it's going to be tough for Boise State. They can do it. They have the pieces. Tyson's a great player. Alvaro Cardenas is one of the best point guards in the conference. They have the pieces to do it, but can they get there? They got a tough draw. I mean, more than likely, their third-round game is going to be against New Mexico, so it's not going to be easy. And they went 0-2 against San Diego State this year already, so tough road ahead for the Broncos.
It is certainly a tough road ahead. And again, we will be predicting this entire bracket towards the end of this video. And we want to hear your thoughts as well. But part of the reason that they're in this tough spot is, like you said, they had those high points, but they also had those low points. I love that you mentioned those 2 big wins early in the season, because Clemson, one of those big wins for them, Clemson only had 5 losses this year. One of those losses to Boise State. St. Mary's, they're number 19 in the country right now, and they only took 4 losses this year. And again, one of those was to Boise State. So this team had so much potential, and we saw that in the discussion and analysis around this team coming into this season. I know they lost a lot of guys. I mean, they really did. Transfer portal certainly hurt them. They lost Rice to graduation, then Ogbo and Rodney Anderson and Whiting as well. But they brought in some great talent as well. They brought in another Anderson, different Dylan Anderson, Cardenas, Buchanan, and obviously they had Dagenhart, Stanley, and Meadows returning. So they really had a lot of excitement building around this team, and we saw that at moments in those high points. You mentioned some of those big wins in conference. New Mexico win, the Utah State wins, both of those very, very strong wins. But then at the same time, you see Boise State dropping to big losses to San Diego State, big losses to New Mexico towards the end there. And then obviously last week, or this last Friday, versus Colorado State. What happened to this team? What was your perspective on how this season worked out for Boise State, and maybe why it wasn't quite as special as people were hoping for it to be?
Well, you used the right word there. Potential is the word for this Boise State season, because everyone saw the writing on the wall. We saw it. Tyson Degenhart's a 4-year starter, former Mountain West freshman of the year, one of the best, greatest scorers in Boise State history. He's there. They had Alvaro Cardenas, who spent 4 years starting at San Jose State, really, really talented veteran point guard, one of the best in the country. Only 9th point guard in Mountain West history to rack up more than 200 assists in a season. So really talented guy. You bring in a 7-footer from Arizona and Dylan Anderson. So all the expectations were there, but they just haven't lived up to those expectations. We saw it. They were picked to win the conference in the preseason, but it just didn't materialize for 2 main reasons. Number one, they just don't have that guy to complement Tyson Degenhart as a consistent scorer this year. Last year they had Ogbo, who was a really talented scorer at every level. This year, they don't have that guy. Cardenas is a great point guard, but he's not a score-first guy. He's a pass-first point guard. Andrew Meadow is a talented wing, but I don't know if battling inside consistently is his strength. Buchanan's been good in spurts, but he hasn't been consistent. Dylan Anderson's really kind of been nowhere to be found. He hasn't really lived up to that hype at all. So really this year, it's all about shutting down Tyson Degenhart. And to his credit, no one's been able to do it. He's having another amazing year. But if you can slow down Tyson, you can beat this Boise State team. That's where it is right now. The future is bright. Like, we've seen great things out of Pearson Carmichael. We've seen great things out of Julian Bowie, an Idaho native. Next year is going to be exciting, but this year they don't have the complementary pieces to Tyson Degenhart. And part of that is guys just haven't taken the steps that we thought they were going to take. Omar Stanley came in last year and played really tough, really consistently. I know he was banged up a little bit early in the season, but he's just been really inconsistent. He's been in and out of the lineup. Javon Buchanan, he's a guy who's an NAIA All-American, put up ridiculous numbers at that level, just hasn't been consistent. He's had some flashes. He's had some great games, just not consistent. Chris Lockhart hasn't come in and stepped in and been that offensive force that we thought he could be. So they just haven't hit on those complementary pieces yet. And that's going to be the question next year. Tyson's gone after this year. Cardenas is gone after this year. Where do they go after this year? I mean, we know Meadows is going to be a starter next year. Bowie's going to be a starter next year. Carmichael's going to step in. But where do they go after that? They're going to have to hit that transfer portal hard. They're going to have to bring in a priority. I want to call him free agent because that's basically what it is nowadays. But they're going to have to bring in a priority transfer to really fill that gap, because they don't have anyone to fill Tyson's shoes right now, especially in the post. They got to get a talented big man. Boise State hasn't had a really, really good big man in a long time. And people thought that Dylan Anderson could be that guy, and maybe he still can. I'm not in the locker room. I don't know all the ins and outs of what's going on with him, but he has not shown that so far this season. So they got to find a force in the paint, a guy that can protect the rim, a guy that can score inside, and can put some fear in offenses because they just don't have that guy right now.
Yeah, I mean, the way my mind always works is it looks for comparisons and then builds those. And between Boise State's dominant number 2 in basketball and their dominant number 2 in football, you kind of see some of the similar comparisons where when those guys, Nash and Genty is super hot, when Tyson Degenhart is super hot and unstoppable, the team is going to be successful. But when those guys when the defenses find a way to corner them in, or when they don't have that go off night, the team looks completely different. Do you think there was any kind of potential maybe getting too drawn in to Tyson Degenhart and his potential this season, maybe make the game plan too focused on him, a little bit like what Boise State did offensively, Ash and Genty? Do you think there was maybe a little bit of too much of a shift to a one-player format and didn't develop those wing players around? Do you think any of this is on the coaching scheme, not just necessarily on the player's ability to produce?
No, I don't think so, because you saw Leon playing with that lineup all season. I can't remember the number, but I mean, I know he's had upwards of 10 to 12 different starting lineups this year, just trying to figure out who works best. And it's just tough when you don't know what you have. That was the problem this year, right? Guys like Chris Lockett, you've seen his high school tape, but he sat on the bench for 2 years, at Boise State. You don't know what he has at this level. Julian Bowie, Pearson Carmichael, really talented guys on tape, but you don't know what they have at college. So Leon came in this year with a lot of unknowns. Tyson was a known. He didn't know what step Andrew Meadow would take. He didn't know what level Chris Lockett would come in at. So I guess if there's any way to put it on the coaches, is maybe the recruiting. Maybe they needed to do a better job recruiting around Tyson. But in terms of focusing too much on Tyson, I don't think so. Tyson's one of those guys that's the ultimate team first guy. He could be scoring 30 points a game if he wanted to, but he's setting up other guys. He's doing the dirty work down low, in part because he has to. Again, Omar Stanley hasn't been consistent in the post. Dylan Anderson hasn't been consistent. So now you're not only relying on Tyson to be your leading scorer, he's got to be your best defender. He's got to be your rim protector. It's just too much on one guy. That doesn't mean that the coaching staff put too much on him. It's just that the other guys around him haven't come up to his level.
Well, there is certainly, this season has certainly brought a lot of some of that negativity out of the fan base when it comes to the team, and especially when you look at Leon Rice. And it's incredible with a coach as successful as Leon Rice has been at Boise State that he does continue to face such negativity. I mean, Leon Rice is 20 or more win seasons in his entire career. Boise State, coming before Leon Rice, they had 7 in the entire history of Boise State men's basketball before Leon Rice took over. They've had 12 with him alone, 4 straight. This season was the 4th straight 20 plus or more win season. 2 regular season championships in men's basketball. They've won the tournament just a couple of years ago in 2022, 5 tourney appearances. But then you start to look at some of those late season inconsistencies, which I think is what some of the fans look to, is those 5 tourney appearances, but they haven't won any of them. They have had all those 20 win seasons, but they've only actually made it to and won the conference championship one time, and that's the only time they've made it to the conference championship, to the semifinal game. So is any of this criticism the fan base, obviously, after the Colorado State loss, was obviously out on Twitter making their comments, and it even sparked a reply from Jeremiah Dickey. And he said, you speak as if Boise State had tradition of success, like over 3+ decades. We didn't. What Leon's team has done, especially the last 4 years, is make us relevant. Expectations are a blessing. No one likes to lose, likes losing, especially me. But I choose to believe, take 0 effort, and cost 0 to do so. Is there any validity at all in the criticisms of what Leon Rice has done or is doing with this team, those late season flutters? What are maybe some of the reasons for Boise State failing to close the gap down the stretch here? And should Leon Rice be feeling any heat when it comes to his position as Boise State head coach?
I'll say this, Boise State is very lucky to have a coach like Leon Rice. He's a great X's and O's guy. He's a great motivator. He's a great relationship builder. He's a really, really talented, veteran, experienced, savvy coach, and he has some great guys around him. And Jeremiah Dickey is right. What people don't really understand in Boise State, and longtime fans should understand this, but to the most of the world, Boise State basketball has been an afterthought for most of Boise State's existence. Boise State is a football school. Sorry to pop anybody's bubble. Sorry to hurt anybody's feelings. Boise State is always going to be a football school, no matter what Boise State basketball does. It's always going to be a football school. And that's not just in perception, that's also in budget. People have got to understand, this Boise State basketball team is not swimming in money. They're not making a lot of money. Boise State football generates somewhere around 28 to 35 million a year. Boise State men's basketball revenue after expenses come out, they're lucky to generate $1 million, $1.5 million. Like they're not a money machine. And so now you look at this environment we're in with name, image, and likeness deals. Boise State can't offer anybody a $500,000 contract like Ogbo got last year to go to USC. They can't do that. And so when you're only putting 5 guys on the court at a time, you can't miss when it comes to recruiting. And if you can't afford the top end recruits, you got to work with what you can get. And so the reality of Boise State basketball right now is that they've got to find the Tyson Degenhardts of the world, the guys that are great college players, but maybe aren't getting the offers from USC, from Kansas, from Kentucky. They're great college players. They're maybe not, NBA-bound players, but they're great college players, and they've got to find a ways to make them work. You know what I mean? That's just the reality of Boise State basketball. But you launched off those stats. I mean, the 20-plus wins, the 3 plays NCAA tournament, 3 straight tournament bids. I mean, for a program that's got one of the smaller budgets in the Mountain West, hear what I said, guys. This isn't the ACC. This isn't the Big Ten. This is the Mountain West, and they're on the bottom half of the Mountain West in budget. He's doing God's work with this roster right now. The fact that he could keep Tyson here and bring guys like Ogbo here, the fact that he can do that is a win. So we just got to trust him. You got to trust the process right now. And the reality of any college sports, but especially basketball, is you got to hit that transfer portal, and you can't miss in the transfer portal. If this time next year we're talking about Dylan Anderson still a bust, this conversation changes. Maybe Leon is on the hot seat because you can't miss. Like I said, you're putting 5 guys on the court at a time. You cannot miss on any of those recruits. So if you miss on Dylan Anderson, he doesn't pay out. Maybe next year the seat gets a little bit warmer. Right now, that seat should be nice and chilly. Leon's doing a great job. He's doing the best he can. Trust the process.
Trust the process. And moving into discussing a little bit more of this bracket and trusting the process towards hopefully getting a win out of it. A couple of wins would be nice, even if it's not winning the tournament overall. Before we actually start making those final predictions, and those will be coming here in a few moments, what are some of the Mountain West teams, aside from Boise State here, that at discussion, what are some of the Mountain West teams that surprised you this season? That maybe just based on what they done last year, what they did this season, they stepped up in a big way.
Well, I'm going to give you 2 names. First of all, is Colorado State. I really thought they were going to take a step back this year. They lost a lot from last year. I really thought for much of the year they were a one-man team. It was Nick Clifford, and he's a great player. I mean, he's the most NBA-ready player in the Mountain West right now. But you can't be a one-man team and win in the long term. Colorado State really grew into itself. I mean, they've had some players that have stepped up. Rashawn Memba, especially, he's a 6'7" forward. Sophomore, he's really kind of come into his role. He was a big time scorer in high school. At Colorado State, they need him to be a defender, a rim protector. They need him to help take some weight off of Clifford's shoulders, so Clifford can be versatile and be a wing, not a post guy. He's stepped up and had some great games. Jalen Lake, is a quick, shifty little guard. Has some great games. Boise State fans saw him hit that last second 3 in their first loss to Colorado State. So I mean, they've really surprised me a lot. But the team that's really surprised me, and the team that I think could kind of, really come up and surprise people in this tournament is UNLV. They don't have the star power. They don't have one guy that really stands out, but they play so tough and gritty. They defend well. They rebound well. And we saw it. They beat Utah State. They played New Mexico to a 2-point game. They played Utah State to a 5-point game the second time. So they're a gritty team that can upset some teams. So, I mean, if there's one team that I would pick as a sleeper, that's not favored to win, it'd be Boise State because they're experienced. But right behind that is UNLV because they're so gritty and tough.
So your 2 dark horses for this tournament would be UNLV, who gets obviously the home field advantage with the tournament being right there in their own backyard, and then Boise State. What is then, before we move on again to predicting this bracket, final question here. What is a Mountain West teams or team that disappointed this season? Came in with higher expectations. I mean, obviously we've kind of touched on Boise State finishing 4th versus number 1 like they were forecasted. But any other Mountain West teams that disappointed based on just what they did last year, their potential predictions coming into the season?
This will maybe sound a little surprising given where they are and their likely tournament run, but San Diego State, They've got no offense this year. Their offense has been on life support all season long. Great defense. I mean, Brian Dutcher is always going to have a great defense. They're going to be the best defense in the league almost every year, but their offense is just not great. Their freshman class has not really panned out. That they have a young big that played well, but they just don't have that star in the waiting, in the star in the waiting that we've seen in the past from them. So I've been surprised by that. And then Nevada, when you have a coach like Steve Alford, you expect them to surprise people. You expect them to find a great player, to come up with some big wins. They've played a lot of teams tough, but they just haven't won many games this year. They just, again, like San Diego State, they don't have that star player. They don't have that guy they can turn to in crunch time. So San Diego State for their lack of offense and Nevada for their lack of wins.
Well, San Diego State and all the other teams in this bracket will have a lot to prove coming into this Mountain West Championship game. We've talked about how important this is for teams like Boise State that are on the outside looking in. Even apparently, if you look at what ESPN's forecasting, potentially even Colorado State. But then obviously, this is that chance. This is that Cinderella moment that makes basketball so special, where anybody can come through, no matter how bad your season has been. Even if it's, what Air Force has done this year, you can still go through the bracket and win, potentially, theoretically, and find your way into the playoffs, which is just a crazy thing that basketball has to offer. So let's walk our way through this tournament bracket here and make our predictions, a little bit of a preview here of who we think is going to advance and win the 2025 men's basketball championship. And we'll start off there at the top there, San Jose State versus Wyoming. Obviously, as you can see, ranked number, or not ranked, but in the conference standings, number 8 and number 9. Neither of them having a great year. Not that those teams usually produce great seasons. San Jose State 14 and 18, and then Wyoming sitting at 12 and 9 overall record. So for that bracket, who do you see advancing to face New Mexico?
You kind of touched on neither of them's having a great year. They've both kind of had their moments, those teams, that they're kind of tough, gritty teams. But I'm going to go with Wyoming here. That they have a really talented scorer in Obi Agbim. I apologize if I butchered that name, but I mean, he's a guy who missed a lot of the earlier part of the season with injuries, came in. He's averaging almost 18 points a game. He's a star guy. He's got star potential. So I think he carries them to a win there in the first round.
I also actually like Wyoming. I know that San Jose State beat them the last time they played, but Wyoming has some real close games versus San Diego State and versus New Mexico that I think shows some potential. Again, it's kind of hard. You like to look at motivation sometimes to say who maybe has the most to come out of this. Both teams are sitting in a similar spot. I actually agree with you, though, that I think Wyoming is maybe the stronger opponent there. They're both very equal. Should be an interesting matchup. So the next Wednesday game there, moving down to Nevada versus Fresno State. UNR is sitting 16 and 15, and Fresno State is sitting at 6 and 25. So very, very much a poor season there from the Fresno State Bulldogs. They're going to have to improve that if they want to compete in the new Pac-12 once they join in next season. However, who do you think wins this game? Is it UNR by a blowout, or does Fresno State find a way to upset? It would still technically be an upset. The number 7 team there in advance to face Colorado State.
I think Nick Davidson leads Nevada to an easy win there. I mean, he's due. He's a 5th-year senior. He's been there for a long time. Big kid, shoots the ball well. I think he gets his big win and kind of his goodbye to college basketball moment there.
Yeah, you're going with Fresno State. Sorry, I was looking at some comments here. There, Nevada.
I'm going with Nevada.
My bad. Yep. I'm sorry. I try to handle both, and then this is the one time I ended up blanking out. I apologize on that one. Okay, so Nevada moving forward, and I actually agree on that. I'm not seeing too many upsets in this tournament, at least in the first Wednesday field. So I agree with Nevada advancing to face Colorado State. And I promise I'm not just replicating everything you had, Ron. I have my own things here, but you're obviously we're on the same page there. So moving on to the next one, I make sure I'll listen this time. UNLV versus Air Force. We have the home team here in the tournament, a team you already called out as a dark horse, going up against an Air Force team that has had one of the worst seasons in the Mountain West, which is somewhat traditional from the Academy team, unfortunately. There, Air Force 4 and 27 versus UNLV team that 17 and 14 overall, but 11-9 in conference. Who do you think wins this game? You've kind of forecasted already, but do you think there's any chance that Air Force upsets them, or does UNLV steamroll through this to the matchup versus Utah State?
I think UNLV rolls to the second round. Deaton Thomas has a big game. Mountain West Freshman of the Year, Jalen Price has a big game. I think it sets up a big game against Utah State.
I would tend to agree as well. I actually like UNLV as a sleeper for this tournament. I think they have a lot to prove. I think there's a lot of pressure on that team right now. Not just that team, but that that program, UNLV athletic department, when it comes to all of their sports with conference realignment and some of the decisions that have been made there. So I think that UNLV has a lot to prove. I know that the fan base has been going after their head coach pretty hard. I think he has a lot to prove as well. And I think that UNLV has a chance here to advance into at least the Thursday game. So let's go again top to bottom, starting off with New Mexico versus Wyoming. This is a number one team. This is a team that probably can get into the tournament without winning the conference. Nothing's guaranteed, but you'd assume that their slot is secure. Does that security favor an upset by a more motivated Wyoming team, or does New Mexico steamroll to the quarterfinal round?
I think Wyoming has a chance to keep it tight, at least for a half, but New Mexico is going to roll in the second half. I mean, New Mexico is the deepest team in the Mountain West right now. I mean, you look at Donovan Dent, really the player of the year vote, it went to Clifford, but Dent could have easily won it. Dent is one of those guys that he is easily the fastest player in the Mountain West. He might be one of the fastest players in the country. When he decides to drive, nobody can stay with him. He's got a beautiful little fadeaway jumper. I mean, he's fun to watch. They got Nelly Joseph, the only player in the Mountain West averaging a double-double. He's a tear down low. They got Mustafa Amzil. Their other post is healthy now. So I think New Mexico rolls at least in the second half.
I agree as well. I think motivation always plays a role in these factors, but motivation can only supplement for so much talent. We're talking about the number one team coming up versus the number 9 team in the conference, and New Mexico has a lot to prove here. Not just, obviously they don't have to win the tournament, but they want to improve their seeding and get the best look they can for a deep run. I agree that I think New Mexico will move on. So that moves to the one that most people probably watching are the most interested in here. The number 4 versus number 5 team, San Diego State versus Boise State. They traded blows during the regular season. Boise State finishing 22-9, San Diego State finishing 21-8, with an almost tied regular season conference record as well. Boise State has been, in some cases, San Diego State's kryptonite. That hasn't necessarily been the same case for the tournament. However, does Boise State pull off the win and advance to the quarterfinal round in the Mountain West Championship with everything that rides on this team now?
I want to say yes because I want to see Tyson Degenhardt's career continue, but unfortunately, I'm saying no here. San Diego State's had Boise State's number in both games in the regular season this year, and that defense is just too good. I mentioned San Diego State's offense is not great, but they play so good defensively. They have 2 long, talented, athletic guards that they're really solid players. I think this is a low-scoring game. I think it could be somewhere about 68, 65, somewhere in that range. But I think San Diego State wins it, unfortunately.
Well, this is going to be the 1 point of deviation here between our predictions. I think that this is very much a toss-up game, like we saw during the regular season. Both teams are not guaranteed a spot in the conference championship, in March Madness. San Diego State currently forecasted to be one of those kind of first teams in, and Boise State one of those first team out. But again, both of them are riding right there on the razor edge, and so San Diego State has a lot to prove here. They obviously have all of their history when it comes to the tournament and comes to basketball. When you talk about Boise State being a football school, I wouldn't necessarily call San Diego State a basketball school per se, but that's definitely been where they have made their biggest splash in the national perspective. And so Boise State, though, is also in the same way motivated. There's a lot of, again, that those negativity and doubt coming from the fan base. And I think that in some ways can potentially fire up a team to prove some doubters wrong. Boise State has obviously everything to lose because I think they have the toughest road, like we mentioned, in this championship. But they also have, I think, even you look at the body of work, the one that needs to win this the most to get into that March Madness tournament. So Boise State, San Diego State, they're both extremely motivated. Maybe it will come down to who has the most fans there. So Boise State fans, I know that there's a lot surrounding this program right now, but get down there and support our team, get them to a win. I'm going to have to, my rational, logical side can't make a determination, so I'm going to have to go with my fan side. I'm going to say Boise makes the win. All right, moving on then to the next Thursday matchup. We've got Colorado State versus UNR that we are both forecasting. Obviously, this has not been decided yet, but that's what we are forecasting. Colorado State versus UNR. Number 2 team, Colorado State, 22-9, coming up against UNR, who we've already previewed. Colorado State steamroll through this with all the NBA level potential talent they have on their roster.
I think so. This is the Nate Clifford game all day. Nate Clifford is one of those kids that can just do everything. He's Colorado State's leading scorer, Colorado State's leading rebounder, and Colorado State's he leads the team in assists. He's 6'5". He can rebound. He can block shots. He's going to have a great day. I think he has a big day. I think Rashad Memba, the 6'7" sophomore I mentioned, he has a big tournament as well. I think they roll against Nevada.
I don't have much to disagree with here on any of that analysis, so we'll just leave it as that. Colorado State advancing most likely out of that bracket. So the final prior to the quarterfinal matchup here, prior to Thursday matchup, the Utah State versus UNLV. Number 3, Utah State, 25-6, taking on UNLV. That dark horse, is this where the dark horse story ends, or does UNLV find a way to advance and keep the Cinderella hopes alive?
This is where I have an upset coming up right here. I think UNLV shocks the world. I think they knock the Aggies off. I mean, Utah State is a great, great team. They are very, very deep. And the great thing about Utah State is they don't have a star player, but from number 1 to number 5 in their lineup, everyone does everything well. Everyone rebounds, everyone passes the ball, everyone shoots the ball well. They have 2 really good guards in Mason Foslev and Ian Martinez that have played a lot of basketball. What Utah State doesn't have is a dominant big man, and I just don't think they can compete with UNLV inside. UNLV's got some pieces. Jalen Price, even Deaton Thomas is big and physical for a point guard. I think UNLV can outmuscle Utah State and get this win. That's what they did in the regular season. When they beat Utah State in the regular season, they outmuscled them. They rushed them. I think Utah State had 13 or 14 turnovers in that game. So I think UNLV gets this win here, shocks the world.
I am actually, again, in lockstep with you on this one. I mentioned earlier that factor of motivation. Yeah, they do. I mentioned earlier that factor of motivation, and motivation can't make up necessarily for a massive talent gap, but I don't think there's a massive talent gap here. I think these teams are actually very similar when it comes to potential talent on this roster. I think some of it's come just down to the coaching and the way the cherry falls coming through the rest of the season. So I think that UNLV, in front of that home crowd with all that motivation, Utah State, while not a lock for March Madness, as a pretty good path there, whether they win or not in this tournament. And I don't think anybody's going to look too down on them for losing to a UNLV team who has a proud history on their home turf. So I think that UNLV does actually end up winning this game, and it's one of the big upsets of the tournament. So moving then on to the quarterfinals here, New Mexico, and we're forecasting both of us on that one moving on, versus I'm saying Boise State, you're saying San Diego State. We'll go with New Mexico versus San Diego State. Who do you think advances out of this matchup?
Again, I think it's New Mexico. I just think New Mexico has the greatest combinations in the conference right now. They have the greatest combination of speed, athleticism, and toughness. Donovan Dent, again, fastest player in the conference. When he turns on the Jets, nobody can run with him. Honestly, when he turns on the Jets, I don't know if anybody can score with him. I'd love to see him and Nick Clifford one-on-one. I know physicality is difference there. Clifford's 6'5", Dent 6'2", but I mean, I'm telling you right now, if Donovan Dent was 6'6", he'd be a top 10 draft pick. I mean, the kid is that good. He's that good. And then Nelly Joseph is a guy that doesn't get a lot of credit, man. He's been around for 4 or 5 years. I believe he began his career in the Big 12. He's such a talented guy. Again, the only player in the conference averaging a double-double. So he's a really, really, really important guy in this tournament. So when you can control the boards and you can outrun everybody, you can beat almost anybody. And I just don't think anybody can touch New Mexico right now.
Well, and even though we disagreed on who is going to be facing New Mexico, it won't matter for our predictions moving into the semifinals here, because I actually do agree with Surf City Bill here. I think that Boise State versus New Mexico, which I'm forecasting, predicting is just going to be too much. I think, again, there's a lot of potential on this team. And can Boise State beat New Mexico? They certainly can. They've already done it during the regular season. They also took a massive loss to New Mexico during the regular season as well. So which Boise State team shows up? And I don't think that is necessarily anything to do with Leon Rice or anything like that. I just think that in this moment, it will just end up being too much. New Mexico will be advancing. However, if Boise State can beat San Diego State, especially if they can do it, by 7 or more points, and then move into New Mexico and keep that game close, keep that game to a final buzzer beater or like a 4-point spread or something like that, that might be enough. It might be enough for them to be considered as like a Dayton prospect to be going in to one of those, again, like a play-in type matchup. So a lot to look forward to in this tournament from Boise State perspective, but I am predicting that they will end up just short here. So that moves us on to the next.
Build on that for a second before we move on. I just want to say, I agree with you. In my opinion, Boise State has to make it to this round to have any shot at the tournament. If they don't make it to this round, they have no shot. Even if they win this round, they're not guaranteed to make it in. But I think they have no shot whatsoever if they don't make it to this round.
I agree. I agree. So a lot of motivation coming into this game, and there will be a lot of motivation on the next semifinal game of the evening on Friday. Colorado State, which we're forecasting, versus we're both agreeing UNLV. A lot of motivation lying on that one. The dark horse versus one of the favorites coming into this tournament. A lot of top level talent versus a lot of home level spirit. Who ends up winning this matchup to advance to the conference championship game, the semifinals?
I think UNLV keeps it close, but again, they give the ball to Nick Clifford late. Nobody on UNLV can stop him one-on-one. If Clifford's on the floor, they're going to win the game late.
I think I agree as well. I think that Colorado State ends up advancing in this one. And I just realized I've been using my terminology wrong. This would be advancing to the finals, not to the semifinals. They would have been playing in the semifinals. I apologize for that. Again, see, it's that lack of basketball terminology. It just all comes back to you. Anyhow, so final matchup here on Saturday at 4 p.m. New Mexico versus Colorado State. This is a big game because it determines who is going to go and be the champion of the conference, obviously, and get that best bid. But it also is a big game because it's going to be on the biggest stage. It's going to have the most eyes on it of all the games in the conference championship game. And it's an opportunity for both teams to make a statement, whether they win or lose, about where they potentially deserve to be seated once all of the shoes drop. So New Mexico, who we're forecasting, versus Colorado State, who we're agreeing on who wins the conference championship for the 2025 men's basketball championship.
This is going to be a really exciting game. I mean, it's going to come down to who does the little things, who wins the rebounding, who scores the tough points. When it comes to rebounding, I don't think anybody in the conference can out-rebound New Mexico. So I'm going New Mexico. But I'll tell you this right now. If Nick Clifford gets hot, there may not be anybody in this conference that can stop him one-on-one. So if this is a 1 or 2 possession game going into the last 3 or 4 minutes, it's anybody's ball game for sure. But I'm going to say this. New Mexico is deeper than Colorado State, top to bottom. Not just in their starting five, but their bench as well. I think New Mexico is going to go deep into his bench in this game. I think Mustafa Amzil is going to be really important here. He's going to be a second rebounder for New Mexico. I think New Mexico controls the boards and wins a close one. I think they win by 4 points.
Well, I'm going to deviate one more time on our conversation here, and I'm going to predict Colorado State. Maybe it's recency bias, having just seen them play against Boise State, but that spirit, that determination to come and beat a Boise State team that was certainly very, very motivated to win, to go through, and the way that they finished that game. This is a toss-up, I think. I do agree with you that I think New Mexico is the better team. They're obviously the better team, the number one in the conference. So I do agree with you that they are the better team. But I think that Colorado State has a little bit of that fighting spirit on it, whereas New Mexico, I think, is a little bit more stable in their position moving into March Madness. I think that Colorado State, there is a little bit more of a drive with them than what New Mexico has. They're certainly the underdogs, and that always plays well as far as motivations go. So I'm going to say Colorado State, but at the end of the day, I think that we're pretty much in the same mindset there, that either of these teams are going to do well coming out of this conference championship game or getting to the conference championship final. So that means then for both of these teams, and any team really that makes it into March Madness, do you see any of the Mountain West teams making a deep run? We talked about how this was a little bit of a down season for the Mountain West. You didn't see those same dominant performances top to bottom, or even at the very peak of the Mountain West this season. Do any of these teams that make it out, whether it's a New Mexico, Colorado State, San Diego State, Utah State, Boise State, or maybe another dark horse that finds their way in, do any of these teams make a deep, Sweet 16 or greater run, San Diego State-esque run like we've seen in the past?
It's so hard to tell because, I didn't see San Diego State making that run they made a couple of years ago. But if there's anybody that's going to do it this year, it's going to be New Mexico. You've got the star power. You've got, again, Donovan Dent, a guy who's one of the best scorers in the country, certainly in the conference. When he's on, he can run with anybody. He can score with anybody. They've got the bench. They got the rebounding. So if anybody's going to do it, it's going to be New Mexico. If I had to lay odds, I'd say New Mexico has maybe a 60-40 or 70-30 chance, of making a run to the Sweet 16. Certainly, I'd be shocked if anyone makes it back to the national title game. But again, it's March Madness. That's why this game is amazing. There's always something that crazy that happens, something unexpected. So I can't wait to see it.
Well, it's going to be a great March Madness season. So make sure that you guys all stick around and watch through this incredible content for Boise State and Mountain West as a whole. This men's basketball championship game is conference. Sorry, this men's basketball championship tournament is going to be a fantastic run. I think that you're going to see a lot of really close games, some upsets here and there. Even though it has been somewhat of a down year for the conference, this is a way for them to finish strong. Again, Boise State fans, please, 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 if you are able, travel down to support your Boise State Broncos in this matchup. Well, thanks again, Ron, for coming on. This has been a great discussion. Always love having you on. Thanks, everybody, for sticking all around to the end and having this conversation with us, and all those who did participate. Please continue that participation in the recorded version. If you didn't catch us live, again, give me your predictions for who you think is going to win this championship. And again, I'm intending to do some kind of raffle for the winners, whoever ends up correctly predicting the championship here. So thanks again, so everybody, for sticking all the way to the end. Make sure you check out Ron's Twitter. The link will be in the description. You can also see it there, Ron the Scribe, on the scroll bar below. Make sure you check out all the great work he's doing at Hero Sports. I'll put a link over to their site as well. And then check out recent videos that I've done on the channel with John Johnson, former Boise State Fiesta Bowl champion, also a Super Bowl champion, coming on the channel. We had a Cameron Jones, recent Boise State recruit, joined me as well. And then just yesterday, I actually did a video with Chris V out of Bronco Nation Updates, talking about the Boise State recruiting class, some of the excitement, and then tons of off-season football content coming your way. So basketball will be over soon, and then it'll be into looking ahead to football. Tons of great off-season football content. We'll have spring game highlights, analysis. We'll have the 2025 Boise State 2025 football preview series. I've already got my guests lined up for that. I'll be announcing hopefully soon. So thanks, everybody, for sticking all the way to the end. Check out all those links in the description. Make sure you like, subscribe, and as always, go Big Blue!